I can see some more folks, some folks from Massachusetts, California representing. But I think we'll go ahead and get started. Bienvenidos everyone to our session on utilizing the higher ed portal to improve educational equity for undocumented and other immigrant students. The outline for today's session is to do a mini introductions of ourselves to have y'all get to know who we are and how we got into the work. And then from there, Christian will go ahead and do a deep dive into the higher ed portal and what that is and the information that it entails. After that, we will have some time to engage with y'all in regards to a Q&A session to answer any and all questions that you may have. And then we will close the presentation with some questions and some remarks. So a little bit about myself. My name is Jaime Ramirez Mendoza. I use he, him pronouns. And I really can't talk about myself without really talking about mi familia, specifically my parents, Jaime y Berta. Berta is the woman holding my master's degree, and Jaime is the individual behind her with the cheesy smile. I'm a proud son of immigrants from Jalisco, Mexico. And they crossed the border in hopes that me and my siblings could one day cross the stage with a degree in hand. And I recognize that I truly stand on the shoulders of giants. And I'm here presenting with y'all today because of the sacrifices they made and continue to make for me and mi familia. I grew up in a really small rural town of Smith River, California, and where myself and a lot of my peers and my friends were first-gen, low income, and came from mixed status families. And as I started navigating the education system and gained resources to programs such as Upward Bound, I quickly realized that not all of my peers, specifically my undocumented peers, had access to the same resources that I did. From there, I went to UC Davis and for my undergraduate and became involved with a program called the Educational Opportunity Program, which is an organization that helps first-gen low-income students of color holistically thrive within their education. And it was here that I was able to use my personal testimonial to really provide students the navigational, social, and cultural capital to excel at Davis. And upon graduation, I did a fellowship through College Advising Corps to be a college advisor at a local high school. And while I enjoyed demystifying the college application process, I saw my students battle against inequitable financial aid and admissions policies, despite them doing everything and more of what they were told of. And this motivated me to pursue my master's degree, which I really got a more in-depth, intersectional, and systemic understanding of higher ed, and it started helping me see the roots of the problems that my students were facing. And to be honest, I never expected to be within the ed policy space as an analyst at EdTrust. And I made that calculated decision because throughout my personal and professional experiences, I was on the receiving end of inequitable impacts of policies for myself and my students. And we were left with individual solutions for much more nuanced systemic problems. And that's why and how I'm in this work. It's because I want to be a part of the next generation of scholars who really center racial justice and systemically transforming higher ed to equitably support and accept historically excluded populations. And with that, I'll pass it over to Christian.
Thank you so much. And thank you to everyone for joining us today. My name is Christian Penichet-Paul. I am the director of the Higher Ed Immigration Portal at the President's Alliance on Higher Education and Immigration, and very excited to be here and to be part of this conversation today. I come from an immigrant community. I grew up in Central Texas and went to Texas State University. As you can see from my graduation picture, which was now about 8-9 years ago, I was the first in my family to graduate. You see me in the picture there with my honors thesis supervisor. And what I knew from a very young age is that I wanted to work in policy areas that really help support immigrant communities. And one of those key areas was helping to expand access to higher education for immigrant students. Very lucky to have joined the president developing this exciting new project that we're discussing today, and to just have the opportunity to share a little bit about the work that we've been doing and hopefully share how it can be a helpful resource for your work and your efforts to help support immigrant and international students. With that said, let me pass it back to you, Jaime, and thank you again.
Yeah, and before we actually get started in delving into the higher ed portal, we actually have some opening questions just to get folks warmed up. We would love for those in the audience to answer one of the following questions that you see on the screen on the chat. One question is, what financial resources are available to undocumented students to attend college in your state? And the other option is, what information or support do you need to help advocacy work for undocumented students within your state? Again, you can choose either or if you feel up to it, you can answer both. But feel free to put your responses in the chat. I'll wait about a minute or so to get some responses, and then we'll move forward. Okay, start seeing some responses in the chat. Oh, nice. Texas has access to financial aid, some loans. California is pretty good in regards to what they provide in regards to in-state tuition, in-state aid. They also have their loan at the UC system. Some supports in regards to Spanish-speaking support for familias and navigating institutions.
Yeah, some very good comments on the chat. And hopefully the portal will be an answer to some of the comments and suggestions. Good to
Yeah,
take all this information in.
it's actually a perfect segue. These are all great. So with that, Christian, I'll hand it over to you.
Great, thank you. And first, just let me say it is my pleasure to introduce you all to the Higher Ed Immigration Portal. The portal is really a new digital platform that integrates data, policy analysis, and resources to support immigrant and international students. Its mission is to try to inform federal policymaking, fuel real change at the state and campus level, and build a diverse movement of partners working alongside the student communities. We launched the portal on March 4th, 2021, so a little bit more than a month and a half ago. And you can find it at the Higher Ed Immigration Portal.org. An important question, I think, to ask is why? And the simple answer is that it is a necessary tool. The idea for the portal started back in 2018 as the President's Alliance was engaging colleges and universities and other partner organizations about a potential resource that might help consolidate information around higher education and immigration and support immigrant and international students. And why that? Well, because higher education leaders are really, I think we went a little bit back on this, we should be good now. Higher education leaders are looking for information and tools to support immigrant and international students. And that is what the portal provides. The portal brings together data, policy analysis, and resources from, at this point, more than 13 partner organizations and contributors to help support immigrant and international students. It is overall a centralized source of information and messaging, one that is easy to navigate, where higher education leaders and students and other stakeholders can go in and find and use information to help affect real change at the federal, state, or campus level. And to dig a little bit deeper into the portal really focuses on key priority populations. Those are undocumented and DACA students, international students, refugee and other immigrant students, and of course, immigrant and international alumni, faculty, and staff across our higher education institutions. I think it is important to remember that first and second generation immigrant students account for 5.3 million students in higher education. For some sense of comparison, that is a bigger population than the state of South Carolina. And there are also more than 1,075,000 international students enrolled in higher education in the US. Together, when you put first generation and immigrant students and second generation immigrant students together with international students, they end up making about 1 out of every 3 students in the US in higher education. Not an insignificant number. And within first generation immigrant students, that includes about 427,000 undocumented students across all states and DC. So a significant population that we try to support and help as they pursue higher education. And what the portal really provides is a number of key features. Among them, really up-to-date student data. The portal tracks the number of undocumented first and second generation immigrant and international students, both at the national level, but also at the state level. We have a national data page and 50 state pages and a state page for DC. And we're working and hoping to expand to Puerto Rico as well. At the national level, we are able to break down the student populations by a number of factors, including race and ethnicity, enrollment in public and private institutions, and even academic level. Through the portal, we also include data on the economic contributions of immigrant students. One key example is that we are able to show how many jobs are created by international students at the national level, but also by state. And finally, we have general data about the immigrant population in every state, data that is helpful for higher education leaders, for students, for stakeholders to use and to use for effective messaging when reaching out to policymakers. The data within the portal has been either commissioned by the President's Alliance or comes from the great work from our partner organizations and contributors who have joined us or allowed us to use their data in this project. Another key feature of the higher ed immigration portal is its analysis of 4 key state policies. We have analyzed all 50 state and DC policies on institution and are completing our comprehensive analysis on state financial aid. And what we look into is how accessible is institution and state financial aid for undocumented students in those states. And after we analyze the policies, we classify each state according to a specific term or classification. As you can see from the map on the slide, each state has been determined and put down into one specific classification that I'll go into a little bit more detail in a second. The portal is also tracking professional and occupational licensure access for undocumented individuals and driver license access for undocumented individuals. We continue to build out this very exciting but also very innovative work in a way. And our hope is to be able to expand that information a little bit beyond undocumented individuals and see how these policies affect other immigrant populations, potentially like those who are TPS recipients, temporary protected status. The policies will be continually updated, and that's what we're doing. That's what we'll continue to do. Something that we're also pursuing is ensuring that proposed legislation at the state level, in particular around institution and state financial aid, is included in the portal. And when you go into the portal, you're able to click on a specific state page. And within those state pages, you'll see the enacted policies around these 4 key areas and soon the proposed legislation. To dig in a little bit deeper to discuss the state classifications for tuition and financial aid equity. As you can see, we classify states according to the 7 classifications in the slide, and all the definitions and classifications are in the portal so that you don't feel like you have to write them down really quickly right now. But we go from comprehensive access, which is the policies that are the most equal, meaning they provide statewide access to institution and at least some state financial aid or scholarships for the state's undocumented students, to really difficult policies, those that are classified as prohibitive enrollment, policies in states that actually bar undocumented students from enrolling in a public college or university. So what we have found is that at the moment there are 17 states and DC that provide comprehensive access, that meaning access to institution and some form of state financial aid to undocumented students. There are an additional 4 states that provide access to institution. Those are or accessible states. On the other hand, we have 5 restrictive states, states that prohibit undocumented students from accessing institution or state financial aid. A little bit harsher than that, there are 3 states, Alabama, Georgia, and South Carolina, that prohibit undocumented students from enrolling in at least some public colleges and universities. In Georgia, which is a big state with a sizable immigrant community, undocumented students are prohibited from enrolling in the state's top 3 public colleges. This is the analysis, the work that we've done, and all this information is hosted within the Higher Ed Immigration Portal. And we include similar comparisons for professional and occupational licensure and for driver licenses. Let me talk quickly about one more key feature of the portal. The portal includes effective practices and other resources from the President's Alliance and from our partner and contributor organizations. Effective practices are essentially resources for higher education leaders, for administrative staff, for students, for any stakeholder that really wants to help support students across higher education institutions. They can look at examples or recommendations from other colleges and universities, or from organizations whose expertise is in the foundation of higher education and immigration. The portal also includes student and alumni narratives, policy analysis, including a specific page on federal policies, which, as we all know, are in the news often and could potentially be leading up to some type of legislation in the next year. And we also, of course, also include research. With our partners and contributors, we continue to add more effective practices and resources to the portal every week, essentially. And our goal is to continue making the portal the go-to destination for information around higher education and immigration. And that takes me to my final slide on the higher ed immigration portal. And that is that it is really a coalition. The President's Alliance is working together with, right now, 13 partners and contributors to bring all this information together, all key resources from organizations like New American Economy, the Dream.us, Forward.us, and WES, so that they're in an easy to navigate one-stop digital platform. We are in active conversations to expand the number of partners with other organizations that are interested in highlighting resources in the portal or working with us to develop new resources. And that is something that is key about this digital resource. It is a long-lasting vision meant to be updated continually to include and incorporate new resources, and to be led by a team of immigration and higher education policy and research experts. We have a tremendous, we have people with tremendous experience on immigration and higher education working on this exciting project. And if you're or your organization are interested in joining or participating, working with us at any point, that is a possibility and one that we would certainly welcome. So if you're interested, please email me email in my presentation. But if you want to write it down, it's christian@presidentsalliance.org. And I'm happy to set up a conversation and see what the possibilities for partnership are. But I know I've said a lot and provided a lot of information. So let me pass it on to my friend here, Jaime, and we can start to dive into some potential questions that people might have. But let me pass it on to you, Jaime.
Gracias, Christian, for really an overview of such a unique and honestly much needed tool. If y'all haven't had a chance, I know Jordan put it in the chat for the link for the website. Has a lot of dynamic state-specific information on undocumented and other immigrant students within each state. We now will actually open it up for questions for folks. Again, I know this is a really high-level overview. I know some of y'all had some questions around, or your reason for here today was around advocacy in regards for your students within a particular state. I see Christian dropped his email in the chat as well. But again, we just wanted to create space to really have an engaging conversation and discussion. So feel free to drop some questions in the chat, and we'll start from there. It's okay, folks. Don't be shy. In the meantime, as y'all get warmed up and start asking questions, Christian, I have a question for you. As you were creating this portal and putting all the state scans together and getting all this data into one centralized location, what surprised you the most in regards to your findings and why?
Yes, thank you. And that is such a great question. I think something that was very surprising when we were gathering all the data and all the information is just how much good information is out there. Excellent resources from a host of partners from across the country. And it was exciting to be able to bring those resources together into one place, because I think as advocates and as policy experts or practitioners in the field, we create so many important resources, but sometimes we're a little bit like Netflix. We put something on the queue and then don't really advertise it or mention it later on. And so I hope that's what the portal can do, to be a place for all the great resources across our partner and contributor organizations to really live and continue to be highlighted and continue to be found by new individuals interested in learning more about how to support immigrant and international students.
Another question in the chat is it says, what strategies work in terms of making sure undocumented students actually access the resources available to them?
So I know there are many experts that can speak to this question, but something that I think is important is when you have individuals working on issues around higher education or immigration, or staff members within different institutions, maybe in the admissions or financial aid offices, it is always helpful for those individuals to be informed about the opportunities available for undocumented students, and even for refugee students and potentially international students, because they are often the first sort of benchmark, the first individuals who are asked by undocumented students, refugee students, what resources, what opportunities are available to them. And if an administrator doesn't know, then the student might think that there are no resources that they can benefit or they can access. So I always think it's helpful to try to help administrators, individuals working in financial aid or admissions offices, other individuals or practitioners in the field, to really have as much information as possible, to really be informed if they ever get a question. And just to conclude my answer, something that I wanted to make sure when we were building the higher ed immigration portal is that it was also a resource that could be helpful for undocumented or for students in general, including undocumented students. So if you have a student who is wondering whether they can access in-state tuition or state financial aid, please feel free to direct them to the portal, because it includes helpful information about their access and at the moment some helpful links to the policy, but also we'll continue to update the amount of information in terms of policies, available financial aid, and other resources. Yeah, but thank you for the question.
Yeah, and as a follow-up to that, and on the Ed Trust side, Dr. Wilder Pilat and Satra Taylor, they actually wrote a blog piece on free college and then providing access to undocumented students back in 2018 or 2019, I believe. And that was one of the most, if not the most visited blog that we had on our higher ed team site. And I say that because a potential low-hanging fruit for institutions or even states is to have websites for undocumented students to go and access, because that actually does create protection for them, that they don't have to self-disclose their documentation status for folks. They can just go and get access to the resources themselves. That is not to say like that was the one all end all be all solution, but that is one that should be part of the solution to really provide inclusive access and center these experiences for them to know what resources are available. Some states are more inclusive than others, but institutions also have a huge responsibility and power to play here. So I just wanted to add that tidbit. I know I saw another question, which is, are there any federal policies that make it hard for states to allow state financial aid to be accessed by undocumented students?
Yes, thank you. And I saw that my colleague Miriam dropped on the chat the link to her federal policies page, and I think that is the definitive answer to that question, which is yes, there are policies that date back to the mid-1990s that have made it harder for states to, or for students to access institution and state financial aid in a number of states. I would recommend individuals to look at the federal policies page, but essentially we're in a situation where states have to actively expand access to undocumented students to be able to provide them with access to institution and state financial aid. And that is a possibility, but it's harder in some states, as you can all guess, than in other states. And that is why we have states where there are no non-policies, where there's really no directive as to what students can or cannot access. And then we have states that are actually restrictive about providing access to institution and state financial aid. On top of that, there is always the potential that a could assess the law from the 1990s and interpret it in such a way that could restrict access to institution and state financial aid for undocumented students. Now, that hasn't been the case. I don't expect that to be the case, but it is a slight possibility that we highlight in our federal policies page.
Yeah, and as a follow-up to that, another question was, under Biden's new budget, DACA students might be eligible for the Pell Grant or other federal grants. So wondering if there's any insights about the federal grants being opened up to all undocumented and AB 540 students.
Yeah, I know we were very glad to see the Biden administration propose in its budget an expansion of Pell Grants to DACA recipients. And I think that is a good policy, an effective policy, and one that, of course, has to be passed by Congress. The administration can't do it by itself, so it would have to be passed by the House and the Senate. And it is something that we at the President's Alliance are looking at very carefully and certainly in support of, because at the end of the day, when you help undocumented DACA students access higher education, that is not a benefit, not a positive result for the students themselves, but actually for their communities and for their state. It helps build their skills, it helps build the economy, and it helps build the local campus social experience in a way, because you're bringing these very unique individuals with an incredible background and allowing them to share their experiences with other students, including those who might be citizens or permanent residents or international students. And I know that's something that's very special about a campus community. Different people from different parts of a community coming together and really getting to know each other. And so Pell Grants are important. It would be a positive contribution, and it would allow states, communities, campuses to really benefit more from the inclusion and DACA recipients in their colleges and universities.
Yeah, something I often reflect about is oftentimes undocumented students don't have access to a system that isn't working to begin with, like specifically financial aid. So, like, Pell Grants would be amazing for undocumented students to have access to, and they're at the like lowest historic purchasing power in its history. So it's like this combination of you should provide access to all undocumented students to the Pell Grant and like reestablish the purchasing power of the Pell Grant for it to actually go and cover the real cost of college for a lot of these students. Another question that I had for you, Christian, was: are there any? So you did this huge. Your organization did this huge statewide scan of all 50 states plus DC. There's a lot of information. Are there any states that stand out for their policies and how they help undocumented students?
Yes, yes, that is a key question. There are states that stand out for their policies in how they help undocumented students. And one example would be California. I think they've been very conscientious about thinking how to really bring the undocumented student community into the fold and allow them to be a part of their public campuses, in the sense that they've thought about community colleges and some workforce programs when thinking about this question of expanding access. But there are also more conservative states who've looked into the question of should we expand access to undocumented students in our state, and have looked at the results and the positive attributes of that policy and have decided to do it. And they've done it in very effective manners. And I hope some of those state policies, be they Texas or to a degree Utah, are policies that can be replicated in other states. Because again, the community, the state wins when undocumented students are not barred from accessing higher education just because of their immigration status.
And as a follow up to that, Christian, I know I've spent quite a bit of time on the portal. And one theme that I saw was a lot of states don't have state policies on whether that be tuition access or financial aid access or access to like professional licensures. From what you've gleaned, is that better for undocumented individuals for there not to be a statewide policy and it kind of leaves it up to individual organizations within the state? Or is it better for the state to actually have a statewide policy for undocumented students?
Yeah, my recommendation would be for states to try to be proactive and expand access to institutions, state financial aid, professional and occupational licensure, even driver licenses for undocumented students. And the reason is that when you expand that access, more students learn about it, more students are encouraged to apply and go in and pursue higher education, and pursue a degree. Whereas in a state where there's not a certain policy, I think the end result is that it's just unclear how undocumented students are, for lack of a better term, charged when they try to go to a public university. And my expectation, my guess, granted it's a guess, but my guess would be that most colleges and universities in those states would just charge them without a state tuition. Or students at least would assume that would be the case. So when in doubt, it's always better to provide a proactive policy and actually take advantage of this energetic young population really looking to pursue and to earn a higher education degree.
Gracias, Christian. And again, for folks who have any questions or follow-up inquiries in regards to the portal, please feel free to drop them in the chat. Um, Something I've been thinking about, Christian, is that the President's Alliance has been doing work even before the portal started for undocumented individuals and immigrant communities. So a question I have is like, what impact has the Alliance's work and the portal has had already in regards to like state policy and or federal policy? How has it been informative?
Yeah, well, the President's Alliance, I came into the President's Alliance a little bit more than a year ago, April 2nd. But what I can say is that we're a small but mighty team, and I think we've had, in my opinion, had a tremendous impact in really helping to highlight higher education leaders who want to support and are supporting immigrant and international students, and to make sure that those leaders are as informed as they can be about what's happening at the federal level, and also to make sure that Congress understands what those leaders are thinking or how they're looking at the issue. And yeah, so I think the President's Alliance has done a great job at that. And on the other side of the coin, I guess, we're also being very mindful about trying to provide, to my earlier point about effective practices, trying to provide effective practices to colleges and universities that could be helpful if they want to learn a little bit more about how to better support immigrant, refugee, or international students in their campuses. And for a relatively new and young organization, I think we're all proud of the work that we've been able to do and grateful for the ability to partner with higher education leaders, but also great organizations who are interested, like EdTrust, that are interested in working on the issue.
Gracias, Christian. Want to open it up, see if there's any last questions before we move on to the last portion of our presentation. If not, well, gracias, folks, for engaging us within that session. As we transition to the closing section, we wanted to inform folks that the EdTrust higher ed team is actually currently brainstorming a project around undocumented students. And our hope is to create a sort of equity framework on what resources are critical for undocumented individuals to have access to at the state level to not just attend and survive higher ed, but really thrive and then use said framework to do some state scans and kind of really building upon with the excellent work that the President's Alliance has already done. So with that in mind, we did have some questions that we wanted to ask y'all to gain some insight. So if I'm going to stop the presentation, the first question is actually a multiple choice question. Hopefully y'all can see this on your screen. And the question reads, of the following metrics, which one do you think would be the most important to track and investigate for undocumented students? And again, there's no right or wrong answer by any means. We just kind of wanted to gauge what y'all's opinions were. So I'll leave this up for about a minute to get everybody's responses, and then I'll move to our second and final question. Looks like basic needs is really taking it home. Yeah, we had a couple more seconds for so many final minute responses. And I'll end the quiz now. See if the results show up. Hopefully. There we go. Okay. So yeah, really basic needs took it home, followed by state level healthcare. I'm actually surprised that nobody responded with other. which is a little bit surprising to me. But that actually is a pretty good segue to our next and final question. Um, so I'll go ahead and exit this out. It'll let me, here we go, and go back to our presentation so I can actually have our question up as a slide. And our closing question is actually an open-ended question that we would love for folks to respond to in the chat. And the question is, what other metrics not mentioned in this presentation should be tracked to help undocumented students? Again, there's really no right or wrong answer. We just recognize there's a lot of brilliance and ideas in the room, and would love to get folks' feedback as we continue to brainstorm our project here at EdTrust. And I'll leave the question up for about a minute or so. Hopefully we start getting some of y'all's responses in the chat. And yeah, I see Mary. I don't see the group results, only my answers. Oh, okay. My bad. As the moderator, I can't see the participants' point of view, but the top one for sure was access to basic needs at the state level, specifically food and housing for undocumented and other immigrant students, followed by healthcare. And then from there, it went, the last two were sanctuary policies and state e-verification. But again, feel free to answer this open-ended question in the chat if you have any ideas. We would love some feedback.
Yeah, and if you think of a metric in the middle of the night, and don't worry, you can also send that to us too via email.
We got one, performance metrics for these students. How are they progressing on their educational journey? Yes, I completely agree. It actually reminds me of how you can embed that within outcome-based funding, and reminds me of the interconnection with Dr. Kayla C. Elliott's presentation yesterday and that new report. The rate of completion for in-state financial aid, and if it's tracked. That's another thing too, and that actually brings a pretty good point in regards to people want data to track and see equity gaps, and privacy protections for undocumented individuals is also critical. So thinking about how the data of undocumented individuals are tracked and stored, and the security behind that to make sure that you can't really identify who is who individually, but you have at least the state data around it, to then be able to see what equity gaps are, because it is a concern in regards to, and I think Mary, you probably, there we go. Mary, you literally took what I was trying to say perfectly into a sentence, which is like the fear of deportation or ICE, or having this centralized data system and then having, bad actors use it for other means that aren't positive. But with that being said, we just wanted to thank y'all for attending our session. If you have any other further questions on the EdTrust and Documented Project, my email is up on the side. Christian's email is also up on the side if you have any other questions on the Higher Ed portal. Wanted to give a huge shout out to Jordan Bussey, to Melva, to the EdTrust IT team for really helping us and gather all this together in a virtual setting. And a special thank you to Christian and to Miriam and to the President's Alliance for coming through and presenting your amazing tools. Christian, I don't know if you had any closing remarks. If not, I just have two last things I wanted to say before we let people go.
No, I just want to thank everyone who was able to join, and of course, EdTrust, you, for the opportunity to present this project that we've been working on for the past year. So we're very excited it's out there, and just thank you for allowing us to talk a little bit about it.
Of course, it's an excellent tool. I really encourage y'all to go, because it really does centralizes so many different websites into one. I don't have to have 10 tabs open anymore. But just some closing remarks. Just as a heads up, our Higher Ed team is looking to overhaul our collegeresults.org website, which is a website where you can compare certain college outcomes, such as graduation rates for Black and Latino students. We'll be reaching out to folks after the boot camp for your input, so that the next iteration of the site is a helpful tool to help y'all push for higher ed equity within your states. And with that, we'll have a 10-minute transitional break, I believe, and then the next breakout session should start at 2:35 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Again, muchísimas gracias for those of y'all who came to our session. Hopefully it was informative, and I hope y'all have a great rest of your evening.